Welcome to another live stream, and I ran out of I ran out of hours on StreamYard, and I don't have the capability, or I don't want to pay for it. I might change that because I do a lot of live streams. I do a lot of recordings and testimonies, and they only give you like 20 free hours. They let you go over about like an hour or so. But good old YouTube. And so we'll just do it this way. And I'm wondering well, it looks like we have a few people out there. Right on. We got someone in the comments. Okay, so it looks like you guys can hear me. And I'm not going to have anyone on as a guest. I'm just going to talk at you. I'm not going to do that on here. I haven't tried that. I'll probably try that in the future, but I just don't want to mess around with it right now. We're going to talk about organized stalking, and the gaslighting, of course, is something that, you never run out of material for that, because it's something that is basically the foundation of gang stalking. And there's no getting out of it. There's so much gaslighting involved, and just everyday life that people don't know about, let alone for targets who get thrown into this nightmare where your whole conceptual framework is flipped. And it's almost like a pyramid of deception and manipulation. At the top, you have the conceptual framework of normality and all these things that supposedly just can't happen to you as a target. And the indoctrination. We've talked about a lot of this stuff before. The Tavistock Institute, controlling people in mass with the herd mentality, and also controlling people through trauma, because of course they found out that trauma equals control, right? And all these things are compartmentalized, and I've mentioned how this stuff is set up. You have the spiritual dimension. You also have the boots on the ground. You have the government programs, right? You've got a lot of things that people don't usually mention. Everybody wants to talk about MK Ultra, but there was stuff that was going on before that. Operation Mockingbird, and then I think you call it either Project Stargate or Operation Stargate, not the one that came out last year, but where they were doing remote viewing. And all these things, to me, they're connected. Operation Mockingbird that was before MK Ultra. And I think there was also, I think it was Operation Phoenix. But when you look at the things that are everywhere, but nobody knows that they're there. You have indoctrination. You have this little secret cabal of people, which is compartmentalized throughout society. Like I said, you have the spiritual stuff, and then you have the CIA, the FBI. And those guys might not necessarily be directly involved, because there's sub programs and deep state stuff going on, or whatever, black ops, and I've mentioned those things, but the infrastructure is there. A lot of targets will talk about the Freemasons. A lot of targets are focused on some of the fraternities and the occult, or just the government, but I think it's all connected. They might not know that that it is, but it depends on how, involved individuals are. Some people are more compartmentalized. You have to use compartmentalization. But that's one of the things that confuses targets. Some of these people are like pawns, and they get involved in your scenario, and you assume that they know more than they do. Sometimes people get manipulated or whatever, and then the syllogistic conclusion is they know they're part of it. Or it's like when targets are getting voice to skull or directed energy weapons, and they assume it's their neighbor, right? They might have something. They might not have any. They might not know anything. I think it was Marlowe. Was that Steve Marlowe that did that horrible thing that I I believe that he was being harassed and oppressed, but I don't really see any evidence to suggest that his neighbors were doing what he thought they were doing. But who knows? Who knows? Because talking about how people can become involved in this whole thing, from my experience, the creepiest stuff is when it's almost like lineages and families and stuff like that do become indoctrinated and involved on some level. They might not know exactly what's going on, or maybe it's just like spiritual manipulation, because I've experienced that stuff going way back, and I've talked about this, that targets, they have a lot of time to think, right? Part of the stuff that you deal with involves, isolating targets, getting them to a place of dysfunction, and gaslighting them and getting them to internalize all this stuff, and just reprogramming them or messing with their mind or driving them to suicide or who knows. But when you think back and you remember some of the weird things that you just couldn't explain, you can see that it was there. You just didn't know what was going on. And I've talked about that before. Sometimes it looks like unorthodox, unexplainable behavior. People are just having a bad day, or they're just being weird, or maybe you think they're on drugs or something, or you don't know. But they're doing the directed conversations. They might even be doing street theater, but it's not aggressive enough to where you really notice it. And I've talked about how targets are sensitized, and they get to the place where they start looking for this stuff, and they start expecting it to be pretty much around every corner, right? All the attention that targets get, that they're inevitably going to start reading into things. It's a huge problem for all individuals who are victimized by this type of organized stalking and illegal harassment. But like I said, the creepy stuff is when you remember the things that they would say, and sometimes it's like foreplay. It's like the little comments, later you're gonna know, or we're gonna drive you crazy, or something, or they'll accuse you of something that you have no idea what they're talking about, but then that becomes part of the theme in the smear campaign or whatever that you're dealing with as a target, maybe years or decades later. And then you remember it and you're like, God, what is this stuff? I had people approach me all the way back into my childhood, and it wasn't just surreal conversations that were going around. That stuff happens too, and it's a classic thing that targets deal with, where people will be talking around them, obviously loud enough for them to hear, but they're not involved in the conversation. And it'll involve something that if you inquire about it, that they won't tell you what they're talking about, or they'll say it's something else, but something is weird about the convo. You don't know exactly what it is. And I've heard that before. It's like, well, we're not going to kill them. We'll just drive them crazy, but not yet. Not yet. It's not time for that yet. I used to get a lot of that. And I was like, what are these people talking about? What do you mean? They're talking about killing people, but no, they're not going to do it, but we're going to drive people crazy. And I thought, who are the, but some of them, and a lot of targets will talk about that. They might be maybe friends or family or something. And that's, the worst part about it, because that's the most trauma that you're going to deal with. But getting back to the point, people, I remember there was one girl that warned me about certain people. You got to watch out for this person. And I was like, why? And then it was it was kind of like the mumbling thing. And then you had, what are you talking about? Well, and then they might give you a few clues or something, but they will mention that it's for later, and it's like a labyrinthian, uh, you know, it doesn't really make sense to you at the time, but it's weird enough, and it's something that's hard to forget just because of the unorthodox nature of it. I think they do that stuff purposefully. And so then you're left wondering, how do these people get involved in this whole thing? I mean, it's like, well, I can think back to when I was like 10 or even before that, and it was like, and then you hear people talking about some of the weird stuff, like they get their kids involved in stalking people or doing, and that's really when targets look crazy. And I would suggest that you be real critical of your criteria to decide who is harassing you and who isn't. Because, like I said, with that, I think it was a Stephen Marlowe case or others, when people, and I've had targets trip out on me before, and I've mentioned this, that new targets can be pretty scary because they don't know what's going on. I didn't know what was going on, and you can get real touchy because within that conceptual framework, like I talked about earlier, you grow up learning to protect yourself. And sometimes you got to stand up to the bully. Everybody goes through that, where you get bullied, and either you figure something out, or you're one of those people that just goes head on into whatever is, oppressing you or whatever. With gang stalking, that don't work very well. It might work with a bully. It might even work with a gang of people. A lot of people get confused on the terminology we use. It's not. It does describe the fact that you're dealing with a cabal of sorts, depending on what you're dealing with. Maybe it's community harassment, or maybe it's the classic targeted individual, the game where it seems like you're dealing with this hive, the Borg, this collective seems to be everywhere, which just, excuse me, makes you look even nuttier. But it does have that I don't know, that's that secret compartmentalization that goes into the whole thing, where there are people, excuse me, I have to get something to drink, that seem to have more knowledge than others, and I've mentioned before that excuse me, some people can get just drawn into this just because of what's happening to the target. And, like I said, you'll be taken to that place of dysfunction because of the harassment, because you're being subjected and hindered. And, you might be dealing with workplace harassment, or you're dealing with, noise campaigns, or neighborhood harassment, or sabotage, or you're dealing with, people are, torturing you in traffic and messing with you, and or just on your daily commute, or maybe even in public places where you're dealing with strangers. And targets, they deal with that kind of thing. It's like, everybody's just acting weird, and then it goes a step further, and I've talked about the incremental subjection to that whole thing, to where people acting weird or giving you the stink eye or whatever, that's enough to make anybody wonder what's up. Why are just being rude, or slamming stuff around. I've seen that, but it's still, at that point, you don't really have any evidence to suggest anything's going on, other than that somebody's having a bad day, maybe, or maybe at best they're using some type of mass area body network to use frequencies to piss everybody off or something. I mean, you don't know what exactly is going on, but then it will go to a deeper level, and targets will start getting the directed conversations with personal information and themes and stuff like that. And that's really when the sensitization begins. So they get your attention, and then they start to inject that incremental level that, of course, is, it's an invasion into your mind. It's like a mental tattoo. I've referenced it as it's almost like, a mind virus, because you're not processing information the same way you used to. And when it comes to gaslighting targets, the first thing that you're going to deal with is that this stuff isn't really out there. right? That's the hidden, that's the secret stuff, right? That some people seem to know, and they're, I don't know. It's like when the target starts to deal with it, they're kind of giving each other little cues and winking, or they seem to know. It's like, when parents are talking around a little kid and they're spelling out words like candy or something, but you're like, what's up with all this? But then, there's different levels uh, of the gaslighting, and not only are targets accused of overreacting. Usually that's, part of the whole thing. Or maybe you have an overactive imagination. Oh, that stuff isn't real. What are you talking about? Why would anybody want to do anything to you? And why would all these people get together just for you? And you look like you're, having some kind of delusion of grandeur or something like that. But it moves further, right? And that can be, just right there alone can be enough. But for targets, and I mentioned this before, there's probably a lot of people out there that are dealing with this thing that don't even know they're being stalked, and they just believe they're crazy. They believe they're experiencing, like the symptoms of mental illness. They might be getting hit with like demonic stuff or directed energy weapons or technology or V2K, but it's subtle. It's not aggressive. There's no game dynamic involved. And they just, they're playing a different game with them, and they just think they're, I don't know, crazy or schizophrenic or whatever. And that, for them, the gaslighting is going to be different. For targets who know, right? They let you know. It's like they want to chase you down or just play games with you or whatever. It's like it's fun. And we've speculated as to what they're getting out of it. Sometimes it's something as simple as money, or just the satisfaction of being in control, narcissists supply. But I think it goes beyond that, and I think some of these things are contractual, in the sense that they're getting, maybe even privileges and kickbacks, and it's like conformity, and some of it's even spiritual. In fact, I mentioned some of that in the interview yesterday with Patrick, concerning some of the weird things that go on in those circles that involve maybe methamphetamines and the occult and stuff like that. That it's hard to figure out how that works. You got somebody who's doing methamphetamines daily, and yet they go to bed and eat, but there's all this other weird stuff going on where they're trying to get people hooked, and they're talking about the vampire stuff and witchcraft and everything. And to me, and I've seen that stuff, I think that there's something else going on there. But we're speculating. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only. But the gaslighting for the targets that deal with the aggressive stuff, it'll move into that area of where it's like a little game, to where they're trying to help you, or it's justified. Not just the smear campaign, right? That's part of the gaslighting too. And you wonder if they even believe the stuff that is kind of floating around. Do they really believe that you're some kind of deviant? Seems like it, because they're angry, they're theatrical, they're in a collusion. It would seem that the forces that be, the powers that be in the universe, had just completely turned their back on you. And so that's pretty good gaslighting. But when they start to justify this whole thing with the theme of they're trying to help you out, to me that's one of the scariest things, because it's absolutely a lie. They are not trying to help you. Okay. And the reason it becomes believable is because they take the target through this menagerie of regulation and dysregulation. And, it's like the perp that infiltrates your life, but they're good at what they do. They're good at the mind games, man. They are real subtle about minimizing you, and real subtle about some of the head games that they're playing. But they're also real greasy. And they'll come and regulate you or get you into a place where you could trust them. This seems like they're helping you out. They'll have timing, and it's like they know. It's some of the stuff that targets talk about. It's like they'll get a body cam or they'll do something, and it's like they'll stop messing with them. It's like they know. It's creepy, and some of that stuff to me is spiritual. A lot of targets will speculate about the mind control and how they're reading your mind and constantly monitoring you. I don't know. I would imagine that, like I said, you can combine how that stuff together however you want, because I think it all comes down from the spiritual dimension anyway. All the stuff that we have is just a reflection of that. But the target doesn't freak out. You become resilient. The mind games don't work, and sometimes they do. I've talked about the first 2 to 5 years. Some people don't make it through this. They might try to get aggressive. They get thrown in jail. They get on paper. They're so offended by that flip of their reality, of their conceptual framework, the injustice of it all, that they think they're justified in doing something really crazy, like maybe Steve Marlowe or other cases out there, Myron May, and they don't make it. They see the whole thing as such an injustice that, and anything is pretty much justified. But they go in war mode, and I mentioned that in one of the live streams, is that you're basically in solution mode to the point where, because they've hijacked your physiological and your psychological survival mechanisms. And you're desperately trying to have closure. You're desperately trying to solve this. You're watching your life just go down the drain. Your social circle, everything, for Myron May, he had a legal career, everything was gone. And it was like, okay, that's it. There's no regard for your safety. There's no forward thinking. There's no long-term plan. It's war mode. It's berserker, and some people, they just do it. It's always the worst case scenario that pops up in your head. And I've talked about that before, that when you start ruminating, that's the default program of your brain. It doesn't matter if you got a doctor's appointment, or maybe you get a little lump or something, a little rash. And for targets, it's way different, because the first thing that's going to pop into your head is it's them. They're doing something or whatever. And then it's always worst case scenario. They're never going to stop. This is your own. And then the V2K for some targets is like that too. As if if you don't just end it all, we're going to, you'll be in a padded cell somewhere with, and then we'll lobotomize you. And sometimes they'll scare you with that kind of direct conversations. I got a lot of that stuff. I got that from one of the staff that was up at the academy when I would be alone. And this was before I even knew what was going on. I would get some of that weird conversation stuff, but he was like one of those sadistic people. It's like that guy, Percy off the Green Mile. He would have been somebody like that. Because he used to enjoy, kind of dysregulating the patients and the people, the kids that were there. And it was like, at first I thought he was, maybe it was just to keep people from becoming institutionalized or something, and, but he liked it. And, one day, I'm all alone with him, and he just walked up to me and he goes, we are gonna put you in a mental institution for the rest of your life and lobotomize you. You know that, don't you? You know what we're gonna do to you. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? And he just laughed. And he was, he would do the whistling and all that other stuff. But at that time, I had no idea any of that. I'd been sensitized. He would be doing that. He'd come in whistling real aggressively and wink and say just the creepiest things to people. And some of the kids that were there had been molested, and he would even use that just to rile them up, and then have them, basically disciplined and maybe even held to the ground after he, provoked these kids and stuff. It was weird. But there, you see these people And you wonder, how all this stuff works. And then targets, they see this, and it's a complete flip of their reality. And you see how, there's got to be some kind of compartmentalized thing going on, whether it's like a demonic hive, whether people are just indoctrinated, whether it's some kind of, social mechanism or some type of infrastructure. Like, I've talked about the secret societies, where you have the infrastructure of the Freemasons moving into the Illuminati, and the spiritual stuff like Rosicrucianism. And a lot of people don't understand how that stuff fits together, but it does. The New World Order, or I don't know, the deep state, it's more at the higher levels, it's more into polytheism. Completely different than the Antichrist. A lot of people don't get that. I'm not going to go into that right now. But you have that correlation of these things within the infrastructure, and then you have that gaslighting that happens to targets, and it's believable because especially for targets that are believers, because one of God's promises is that He can work all these things out for your benefit. He's not intimidated by it. It's really confusing as to why He's allowing it. That's one of the biggest issues for believer targets is, because it just keeps going. And they'll use that, because it's like, oh, if this was just a test, it'd be over with. And it seems like it's one thing after another. It's like you're cursed or damned or something. And then you get into these false soteriological platforms like Calvinism or compatibilism or determinism or Molinism. And, that's, and I've mentioned that, those are handlers too. The people that the false teachers and some of those denominations are nothing more than part of the mechanism. It's like you get chased to church, but it's like a got milk commercial. Are you really where you need to be? And you're like, whoa, what's going on now? You're getting gang stalked there. It's even more offensive because usually they, play a long con with you, or they'll get your trust. But, these handlers are everywhere. But the whole gaslighting lie is that they're trying to help you. And you wonder if they kind of arrange it that way. And I've heard targets, they'll come in and make comments, and they'll say, gang stalking is the best thing that ever happened to me. And they helped me out. No, they didn't. They did not. Their intentions were malevolent, man. Okay, God worked it out for you. Thank Him. They were trying to kill you. They were trying to drive you crazy. Okay, they try to minimize this whole thing, and it's not something that you can minimize. And part of the gaslighting goes into the dysfunction that the individual experiences who's being victimized, and then they'll try to blame you for all that, right? You're getting morbid, you're depressed, and well, really, oh, you're getting paranoid. You've got to have some faith. You're that big, powerful God that you believe in. He's going to protect you, isn't He? You don't have to worry. I don't worry, but I don't live in fear. And then the target is getting gaslighted that they're not, walking by faith, or that they're living in fear, or whatever. And in fact, I think that was in one of the interviews where that individual was internalizing all this stuff. And I'm like, you're going down that road they want you to. You're internalizing this. Okay. Anybody who experiences gang stalking or organized harassment in a way where they're not only being surveilled, or their phone's being hacked, or their dwelling is being invaded and they're being sabotaged at work, or they're going to be paranoid. Okay, they're not experiencing the sequelae of a mental disorder. They're not experiencing a faith crisis. Okay, they're experiencing the raw, unadulterated, predictable, obvious, natural effect of that environmental, stimuli and tyranny that has come at them. I'm going to go and see what you guys are doing out there. Okay. And Casey says, I am straight to the point. Right on. Welcome to the live stream. I don't know how long I'm going to do this one. Like I said, if you just joined, the reason I'm not doing the StreamYard or having guests is because I ran out of free hours. So I don't have, I'm not a rich person. In fact, some of the perps would come in and make fun of me like that, and but that's okay. And so it'll be a little while before we do that again. I look forward to that, unless I break down and upgrade. I suppose I could upgrade for a month or something and then just cancel it. No, but praying for financial breakthrough there. First Thou 8, welcome to the live stream. Okay. Kenchia, welcome to the live stream. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Kenchia says, my life has been fake all along, and the military is involved. Okay. Okay. And I'm going to go through and look at some of this stuff here. Okay. All right. Okay. It looks like Casey says, I actually had someone knock at my door and threaten my life. You didn't do anything, yeah. Well, that's classic. You never know. You never know what the hell's because it that's part of the gaslighting too, because the easiest thing to manufacture is fake anger. Right? Some of these people get theatrical though. I mean, it's like it's almost like an entourage to get your attention. It seems more believable when they involve, fake sympathy or something, where they start crying or doing the directed conversations around. I've it's too bad we have to do this. They seem like such a good person, and it's just like, what are you guys talking about? And then or they'll just come and say it to you. I had someone do that where they just came over to my house, and I just wanted to see you before they drive you crazy, and I didn't know what the hell she was talking about, but it's something that'll get your attention and it'll stick in your mind because it's just so weird. And that's even when you get into, like the false teachers and stuff is the reason people fall for it is because it involves them. It's like, they'll tell you you're special, or maybe they think you got a spiritual gift, or that you could be a prophet or something like that, or that God's hand is upon you or whatever. And then there's the seducing spirits that can go along with those false teachers with lying signs and wonders, and even emotional stuff where people will feel euphoria, or you get into that the stuff that started. I don't really exactly remember when exactly it was, but you have a lot of that stuff. The Toronto Blessing was a good example, where you had the holy laughter and the holy rollers and stuff. To that's not drugs. That's not. I mean, that's some kind of spiritual thing going on. And I try to be real careful how I criticize, because I know there are people on their journey of faith, and maybe they had an experience that awakened them to the spiritual reality in one of those churches or around some of those people, and they just haven't figured out, that there's, charlatans and stuff like that involved in this whole thing, and they're innocent. They're like little babes in the faith, and I don't want to. So, I'm not going to get too aggressive on that, but they're handlers. But the reason that it's, I don't know, palatable is because they will use different forms of stimuli. It's like bait, I've even seen that before when you get into the mass gaslighting, like the Mandela effect, or the stuff that targets talk about with controlled programming. And it's like they think that the radio is talking to them, or the newscasters know something or whatever, and it seems like it. And that's one of the ways that controlled programming can work, or it could just be technology, like that movie The Game, where they literally, nowadays it's with the deep fake and everything, they could do that, and they had that technology way before we knew about it. They had deep fake technology and stuff like that way before they had this stuff, so who knows? But that's, two ways it can be done. They can sensitize people and use themes, and then they're going to process the information in a personal way and think that it's all for them and they're in a matrix. And, how could the night show be talking, the same way all these people are, and the news, and it just freaks them out. But they can use technology to do that stuff too. But the mass gaslighting can go into a lot of different levels. And, it just flips the reality of the target. And the danger of psychosis at that point is, it's, how do you explain something like that? I mean, if you dare talk about it, you're going to look crazy. But when you get back into these spiritual handlers, they'll do something the same way. They'll have a TV show, or they might have a broadcast, and they'll say, their Lord is, I don't know who is out there. This is for someone out there. And they'll blah, 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 blah. They'll go off and say something, but it's part of a theme. Okay. And you eat it up, right? Because, you think you can trust someone. This person is working for God or whatever, but, later you figure out that these things are out there. And like I said, there's a lot of different levels to this whole thing. And it's really frightening when you figure it out. I'm going to go back into the comments. We're just trying to help you. Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking through some of the older comments. Okay. All right. I'm going to go back up to the top. And we got Big Dog Corn Dog. Welcome to the live stream. And Big Dog Corn Dog says, whoops, it flipped on me. Understanding the psychology of these people is one of the most important gems of knowledge to obtain when you're a targeted individual. I would agree. You got to profile them. You have to know. That's a good point, because they will try to gaslight you. They wear masks. They try to pretend like they're friends, or they're helping you out, or they're just concerned, or whatever game they're playing. And they're liars. Some people are confused. They get drawn in. Maybe they're manipulated or whatever. But the thing you can't miss, and it's not that you need to become hostile. They're trying to hurt you. They're trying to mess with your mind. This is not, biblical, discipline. Okay. And I've gone into that before, that because they'll try to convince you of that whole thing. God is doing this for your good. And well, he might allow it, and he might be able to work it out, but he didn't work that way. Okay. And it's very clear that when church discipline is referenced in the Bible, that you're supposed to go to someone very meekly, very lovingly, and show them their fault in private and talk to them. If that doesn't work, get a couple other brothers and sisters or whatever, maybe 2 or 3, and you go talk to them very lovingly, very, humbly. And if that doesn't work, then you kind of step it up a little bit within the congregation. And if that doesn't work, then they get excommunicated, but not permanently, right? And so they go out, and that's what Paul was talking about. You hand them over to Satan for the destruction of their flesh. It's not talking about killing someone, because that example in Corinthians, where that individual was having sex with his father's wife, right? And it was like a dispute, and he had to specifically address this whole thing, you know. But later he said that you should renew your love for such a one lest they become overwhelmed, because we are not unaware of the schemes of the, you know, the kingdom of darkness. And so does that fit the biblical framework? Because those are your foundations. The word of God for me is the foundation. If it deviates from that, you call it what it is. Okay, it's a lie. People are trying to convince you that they're trying to help you if you're one of those people, and they're successful at it because God is able to work this stuff out. And then they minimize we weren't really trying to get you to, you know, commit suicide or, you know, go kill your neighbor or something like that. We just nah. And they're winking, and, you know, it's just like a little cute thing or something, but it's not. This is like what I've said before. It's attempted murder, right? You don't know what's going to happen when you do this kind of thing to someone. You just don't. And it's very reckless and very dangerous. I'm just reading through the comments. And Big Dog Corn Dog says, the reality is that your presence triggers these types of people, and they harass us, because it emotionally regulates them. There's the other related reasons, but that's the main one. So they get regulated. I think that's a good point. And that kind of goes into what I was talking about, where it's, you know, even when you get into some of the stuff that targets deal with, and I've seen it, it's like people just get agitated or whatever. I used to see that at the workplace right away, you know, back in the early 90s. And then they'd start doing the unorthodox behavior, and then they'd start saying things and slamming stuff around. And then, you know, they would turn on me with something, and I might get, you know, dysregulated or angry. And then it was like what Big Dog Corn Dog's talking about, is all of a sudden they're happy. It's like they passed on the buck to me. It's like a disease or something, you know, like a quantum entangled, you know, pestilence or something. But they do. It's almost like vampires. They used to make comments like that. In fact, I talked about that in one of the live streams, like, oh, that fruit tastes so good. And then they're fine. They're all happy, and then you feel like crap, and you're nervous, and it's like, and you're really that worried about it, you know, and it's almost like something else is messing with you. This stuff sounds crazy, but it's real. I'm gonna go back into the comments here. Okay. And let's see here. Okay. All right. You guys are having a convo. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. JDO says this is not to improve your life and character, period. No. Nope. It can work out that way. You know, it's kind of like that movie, The Game. I was blind, but now I see. And so, you know, the whole idea, after they get Michael Douglas to basically think that he's killed his brother and he tries to commit suicide, they break out the champagne. That's the kind of stuff they do to you. It's like, oh, snap out of it. Come on. What's wrong, man? I know you've been going crazy, went to a psychiatrist, you know, got chased down to Mexico. You know, you come close to dying several times and, you know, contemplated suicide, but snap out of it, man. We're just here to help you out. Yeah, right. Then, you know, some people believe it, you know, and it depends. And there's that repurposing. I've talked about that before. When you get into the false denominations and some of these doctrines of demons, is that they'll play that game with you. And it's like they'll chase you to that place. And rather than, you know, continuing the gang stalking, they'll stop. But they will stop around the axiomatic suggestion of some type of propositional tyranny that they want you to have. They want you to believe that to promote it to other targets. Oh no, because look, here's little Billy, and Billy says that gangstalking was the best thing that ever happened to him, and they were just trying to help him. He was isolating. He was off in his own little world, and they just had to snap him out of it. And so now he's the little poster boy for their gaslighting to get into your head, right? This doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit the foundations. And if it doesn't match, it doesn't match. And you gotta use that criteria when you get into the denominations and some of those false doctrines. It's the same way. They'll get regulated and feel peaceful, and all their symptoms will go away. They might stop having insomnia. They might start having, stop having panic attacks or whatever, and they'll assume because of that stimuli that they're believing the right thing. That what is coming at them is from God and true. It is not, though. It's horrifying when you see this stuff out there. Okay, and I'm going through the comments still. Sentinel, welcome to the live stream. Oh, here's a good point from Sentinel. Yeah, we want to help you improve thing is a massive lie. It's a constantly moving goalpost. That's a good point, because that's true. They'll pick something out in your character defects or whatever they're going to use as an axiom for the justification and gaslighting. And then they'll, surround you with other pressures. And I've talked about this, especially when it comes to addiction. Maybe you've got a problem with whatever. Doesn't matter what it is. And they use that as the moral high ground, supposedly, or the axiom of their gaslighting and justification. The problem is that they are going to, let you know. And so now you're supposed to internalize that. And you're so wrong, because you got to be, because all these people hate you now, or whatever's going on in your life. You're so wrong. And then, they'll ramp it up. But the problem is that the added stress is going to drive you to do the very thing that they're saying they're trying to get you out of, right? Whether it's, maybe alcohol or something else, assuming that you have to stop doing it. If you can drink responsibly, I don't see a problem with it. Of course, they don't want that. And that gives them power, because now you can't have anything. You can't do anything, and they'll use deprivation methodology on you and then start driving you crazy. And then when you do, they want you to go on a binge or something, because they put it in your mind that you can't do that anymore. You can't have this, or you can't have that, or you're not supposed to, even I think it was the Nevada Nick testimony. It had to do with swearing. That's a funny one. Because what happened, that stuff is programmed into you. You grew up around it, you heard it, it went in through your ears, and it got in your head, and it's psychologically, amalgamated in itself within your conceptual framework as emphasis. And when you get angry or frustrated, what comes out, right? And then unfortunately we do that. I'm trying to move away from that, because I see it's programming. But the funny part is that they'll use that as an axiom. And then they'll surround you with very abrasive stimuli to the point where you do it. And then it's just like a vicious cycle. And then they'll gaslight you. It's like vampires. Whatever you do, don't do this. And then it's like, don't think of pink elephants. So then their justification never ends. It's like Sentinel said, the goalpost is just going to keep moving. Or they'll play the game where you do. And I did that. There was a lot of things that I stopped, and I kind of bought into that whole thing. Maybe God's trying to, tell me. And so I wouldn't do it anymore, but it doesn't matter. They'll do it anyway. Right? And that's the worst part, when targets, like I said, the first 2 to 5 years can get pretty bad. And so they might have had a habit or whatever, and then I haven't done it, but they're still doing this to me. I learned my lesson. I'm not, and That's not what they're doing. That's the gaslighting, man. They don't care about your character defects or whether you got an addiction or any of that stuff. They're just there to hurt you. They're there to play with your mind. They are there to gaslight you and get you to internalize this whole thing and just rearrange your brain, right? It's like I said, the one in a lot of streams I said this, that the blessing is that you can see the malevolent evil nature of it. And for you, if you're a classic target, it's aggressive. And so at least they're not going to be able to gaslight you as easy, right, as the people out there who are dealing with the subtle stuff. Yeah. Okay. Let's see what else is going on. Okay. And Quentin Gay says they hoped the side effects of their tactics would match their projections and gaslighting, all the while denying it's happening. Yeah, yeah, exactly. They always deny. That's one of the classic things about the perps, and I've mentioned that many times when you're dealing with these individuals, and they're always like that. They have a lot of things in common. That's one of them. They always deny. They always play stupid. They always obfuscate their activity. They try to reframe this stuff. They always accuse. They always, promote, um, you know, the wrong narrative, and they'll just basically distort your reality and then try to get you to believe you're crazy. They like leverage. They want to provoke you. They like to chip away at your sanity and then, just, provoke you in public or something and get everybody else to believe that you're crazy. They, destabilize you. They use the directed conversations and just, trigger you constantly. And they'll flip the stimuli too, right? And sometimes they're polite about this stuff, right? They're, they're really sneaky and greasy about it. They can be sarcastic and inquisitive. Sometimes they'll have that whole thing where they look like they're trying to help you or whatever, but really they're just sabotaging you. They just want in. They want in to get within earshot. They're camouflaged by that whole thing. And sometimes they're very charismatic. And it can be people in your family. It can be, someone in church. It can be a neighbor. It can be a coworker. And then there's the obvious perps, and they're just, they're there to get your attention no matter what. Never give those guys the reaction that they want. Make them go over the top. Don't give them nothing. The covert perps and the invisible ones, right? It's like targets will talk about, hearing bell tones or, suddenly having a mood switch that just doesn't make sense, or intrusive thoughts start coming into their mind. But of course, once again, you're just a freak. You're crazy. I don't know, maybe you need to be force medicated or something. I don't know what your problem is. They like leverage though. And a lot of the gaslighting gives them that leverage. And they have their tools, break-ins, covert drugging, poisoning, the old food tampering. But, they want you to be paranoid and just be in that state of fight or flight all the time. Yeah, let's go back in here. Okay. And let's see here. I got one from Wendy. I am alone except for Jesus, right? And I've been praying for a tribe, a village to understand. This is my first time listening on a channel like this. I don't know who to trust. Right. That's what they do. And that's the problem. For me, because that can play into the gaslighting too, because then you've lost your faith in humanity or whatever, or you're not walking in faith. If you're looking, it's like when targets get workplace harassment and they try to find a job where they're not going to. If you're a classic target, something's going to happen. If it doesn't, great. just walk away and forget about this stuff and go on with your life, man. But a lot of targets, they'll try to find somebody they can trust, or a group of people, or a workplace that's not involved or something, and you might be looking for a while. A lot of targets will they'll leave the United States, or they'll leave the country where they are. Right? Their family has become involved. People can be manipulated, man. And it's sad. It's sad but true. That's one of the worst parts about it. It's very destabilizing. Realistically, you've already got, Christ figured out. You can trust him, absolutely. And just keep praying and talking to him and drawing near to him. As far as everyone else, okay, here's the thing. They need to earn trust. It's not your problem. That's part of the internalization. And a lot of people will do that. It's, I got your back. Hey, and a lot of talk. A lot of talk usually means very little action. And you can see a con artist coming a mile away. What do? They look you in the eye, they shake your hand, and they try to get your confidence. It's like some people are like that around me. It's like, if I can just look somebody in the eye and shake their hand, I can tell whether you can't. Every good con artist, and there's some real good ones out there, do the same damn thing. And so unfortunately, you're stuck in that dilemma. Be realistic, set up healthy boundaries around you. And one of the freedoms that targets get is that you don't need constant affirmation from people. You don't know it because you're it's like the Tavistock Institute. You're raised that way. You need people, right? You need their affirmation. You're part of the herd, because we are a type of collective, technically. We're in societies, we're in families, we're in groups. But the truth is you don't. You do not need them. Okay, you definitely need the Lord. And there's things that you need to do to survive. You need to be able to work around people without, trying to solve everything to the point where you're burning bridges and in solution mode, to where you're confronting people or trying to, get logic from a framework that is really just nothing but gaslighting and illusions. And you can't do that. And so if you're needy that way, you're kind of you're already set up. One of the freedoms that you're going to get is self-sufficiency. Okay, that's one of the realities, right? And of course that you can trust the Lord, and whether other people are going to be manipulated or not, that's kind of their deal. Unfortunately, targets are usually isolated to the point where they're gonna have to learn that, and I'm in that place. It was really tough though, especially if they're playing games with you and they're setting you up and you're getting called out or whatever, and you think that you got to solve it. And a lot of targets get involved in trying to prove their innocence, trying to prove that this disinformation campaign is not true. And it's a trick. Okay. It is, you are giving them the authority to govern your emotions, your validation, and everything else. They don't get that. No one should have that. Okay. No one. Because now you're their slave. And, for a targeted individual to be in this dilemma, just period, is difficult. And I would suggest that, because it's even more discouraging, I would suggest that you learn to be self-sufficient, but it's even more discouraging when you find a community like this, and a lot of targets are dealing with this, and you find out there's perps, and they're just pretending, but they're so nice, and God bless or whatever, or I'm praying for you, and little hearts and all this stuff, and and sometimes they'll love bomb you for like a year or two, and then just flip on you, or they'll just disappear and ghost you, and and just because they already, the technique is that they've invaded your psyche, and you got sucked into their greasy affirmation and the bait because it felt good. Oh, this person likes me, right? And all the tyranny around the target is that you're a horrible person and you deserve to be stalked and harassed. And so it's real easy for them to play that game with you. That would be my advice. Be realistic. And, the foundations of your affirmation, they come from your relationship with the Lord and just the truth of your existence, right? All this other stuff, like, the worst part about it is that it seems like they believe it or whatever. Or maybe there's even something out there that's true. Maybe you're one of those targets who has done something. They still don't have the right to do this stuff to you. Okay. And eventually they're going to run into that reality where they're going to need mercy from the Lord because they've messed up, especially the stalkers, because they're not supposed to do this stuff, right? We are supposed to be gracious. And because why? Because we need grace. We are supposed to be loving and compassionate because that's what you want, right? Basic stuff. Treat others as you want to be treated, right? That's not rocket science. But they're violating all those things. And the interesting part, and I've mentioned this a lot, is that eventually this stuff is going to be brought to light. Eventually, everybody's going to know. That's the good news. If you're out there and you just feel marginalized, or that you're just going to fade off into nowhere, and all these people are never going to know all these things, they're not believing you. You're frustrated. You're in solution mode, or you might be running for your life, or just experiencing that environmental tyranny that has vexed you, and it just seems like the injustice is too much. It's temporary, absolutely temporary. Okay, you are not going to remain in this darkness. Okay, and eventually, it's going to be brought out on the table. It might not be until the return of the Lord, or after you leave, and then it's going to be the Lord's going to deal with it. He is, and so I just thought I'd put out that as well. Let's see what else is out here in the comments. Okay. Okay, let's see here. And Request Truth says, regulate internal emotions as a balance between their lies and one's influence. Well, they get emotional control over you, and that's all they need. And yeah, the influence that people have, even just the stuff that targets deal with in directed conversations, it's like they get to the point where they just have to wear headphones because they're constantly getting triggered. And the worst part is that a lot of targets will start reading into things too. And then you're dealing with the themes that are already out there within the framework of our created order, and they take on a whole different meaning now. And that's part of that gaslighting. And it's like I've mentioned this. If I could see someone who was maybe acting paranoid or whatever, and I could use the same themes that are used on targets and throw something out there, maybe mumbling to myself, or I could get somebody else involved in it, and I said, let's talk about this, but just amongst us around this individual, and we could hit all the different themes, right? Whatever, right? Drug dealing, being paranoid, thinking people are watching you, stuff like that, and it's one of them's going to hit. And their conceptual framework at this point is that right? Really, I would have no idea. I'm just taking a guess. But that's the themes. Those are the things you have to deal with within the framework of where we are. And there's always going to be something there after the target is sensitized where they're gonna hook you. They're gonna be able to trigger you in some way. And like I said, some targets will just literally have to wear headphones, right? because they can't deal with it. And I get it. I mean, usually that goes away because, and a lot of targets have mentioned, whether it's noise campaigns or directed conversations or whatever they're doing, when it doesn't work anymore and they're not getting the reaction that they want, they lose their incentive. And that's when the guys with the baseball bats and the obvious chain yankers come out, because the mind games are pretty much over. Right now that they're going to try and take you into different levels of this whole thing, but at that point they've lost because they can't gaslight you. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Well. Okay. Well, like I said, guys, I just wanted to come out here and just interact with you and talk about this, because I think it's, just that whole idea that this is just, it's not that big a deal. It's just a little bit of, we're just playing games with you kind of thing, that lie, that gaslighting, and how targets can get drawn into this where they think people are trying to help them, or that these people are justified in doing this whole thing. It's ridiculous. And they want you to internalize that whole thing, right? And it plays on the original, I don't know, indoctrination and gaslighting that we all get, that this stuff is not possible. It's not out there. There's no secret societies. There's no gang stalking. None of that stuff is normal. And, once that happens to you, especially when targets start dealing with stuff like V2K, right? You're just, yeah, you're whacked out. It couldn't possibly be something demonic, spiritual, or, a government-based weapon, or, something that someone is using in a private investigating attack against you. Because some of these guys have equipment. Some of the stuff that targets are dealing with, it doesn't, even if you are getting, voice to skull, it might not be who you think it is. Like I said, some people believe it's their neighbor, or they'll hear, because they'll use different voice technology or something, or, it's like somebody brought up a little while ago that they were talking about how, when people die, they get, because some people believe that some of the spirits out there are the evil dead, that they come back and they harass people just like the unclean spirits. I don't think the Bible is, some people believe, it's not in the Bible. And when you get to Hebrews 9:27, that pretty much refutes that once a person dies, they go to judgment. They don't come back. And really what's going on, you're dealing with familiar spirits or something, to where they will mimic your relatives or people who have passed on or something. But, as far as technology, they kind of do that thing too, right? It's like some of the speculation that I've talked about before, when people deal with these, alien abduction things. And it's not that I don't think they're making it up. I just don't think they're processing the information correctly, right? It could just be something that is to cover up, gang stalking or some type of government program, to where these people, they don't think it's, some kind of psyop. They think it's aliens, or it's really something demonic, and they want you to believe it's aliens, because that goes along with the delusion and the propositional tyranny that they're after, because they have to get you to believe something that is not true, and then they take you captive. But I just wanted to come in and do a quick live stream with you guys, because the gaslighting is exponential when it comes to this. And I just wanted to put a little bug in your ear to remind you that these people are liars. They are very evil, and they are not trying to help you. And don't let them minimize it and laugh it off and wink and, just pretend like it's a little game, because it's not. Because that's gaslighting, okay? This stuff is reckless. And it doesn't mean that you got to, get angry or, get hostile with them or whatever. But, the thing is, sometimes, especially when family are involved, or, your friends, or just the environmental tyranny is so heavy, it's just, I think some people believe it because it's easier to swallow. It's a less, I don't know, harsh explanation for the reality that you were experiencing, rather than to believe and comprehend that these individuals are really that malevolent, that they are really trying to hurt you, that people would turn against you. Like, it's just easier to believe that that can't be going on. And unfortunately, it is. I'd like to thank everyone for coming in. God bless. Be good to yourselves. Be safe.